Hi, I'm Julia Ray Benetand. This is the story of how I was erased from my own family's legacy and what I built in the silence they left behind. I wasn't just forgotten. I wasn't just excluded. I was used. Used to design the branding for my sister's wedding, used to polish the image of the family business, used to make things beautiful while being told, in front of strangers, that I didn't belong. My name wasn't on the guest list. My chair was never set. My work was everywhere, but I wasn't invited. And when I finally stepped back, quietly, they didn't notice until the investors called me, not them. This isn't about revenge. This is about reclaiming worth, where there was once only silence. Wait, before we go any further, where are you watching from? They said my name wasn't on the list. Not as family, not even as a guest, just not there. I remember standing at the entrance of the Bennett Group's anniversary gala 30 years in the making. Marble floors, golden chandeliers, a string quartet playing a Chopin nocturne just inside the ballroom doors. The kind of event where everything gleamed too brightly, where the wine tasted expensive but cold, and nothing truly warm was ever offered. I had designed the logo glowing on the grand backdrop. The menus, the invitations, the gilded seating charts, they were all mine. Every detail had passed through my hands. I had worked late into countless nights, fine-tuning fonts, correcting print proofs, testing colors under studio lights, until it felt perfect, until it felt worthy of the family name they barely allowed me to keep. But I was not on the list. Elena Me Mother walked past the doorway just as the guest manager hesitated, scanning the digital tablet once more. Her eyes caught mine for a moment, just long enough to register my presence, then flicked away like I was a misplaced light fixture. She turned to speak to a man in a navy suit, some investor, some chess piece she had to move that night. I cleared my throat softly. "Excuse me, could you please check again? Julia Bennett." The assistant bit her lip, eyes bouncing nervously from the screen to my face. "I'm sorry, ma'am. You're not listed here. Maybe you're with the vendors?" Vendors. Not sister. Not daughter, not co-creator of this whole image they were selling to the world, just someone who worked for them. And not even that, not officially. I had done it all for free. My heart didn't drop. It slowed. That was worse, I think. A kind of cold realization that doesn't break you, it hardens you. The assistant gave a tight, embarrassed smile. "Would you like me to call someone from the team? Perhaps Madison?" Madison. My sister. The favorite. The face of the family's empire. The one who had asked me months ago, "Hey, since you're a designer and all, think you could help us with the look of the thing?" As if it were a casual school project. As if I didn't have clients paying 5 figures for the very work I was giving them for free. I gave the assistant a polite nod and said, "That won't be necessary." Then I stepped aside, heels clicking against the stone floor. I stood near one of the massive columns just off the main entrance and watched as people entered, guests wearing suits that whispered old money, women whose laughter sounded rehearsed, who carried clutches too small to hold anything real. My work was in their hands, tucked neatly between monogrammed napkins and seating cards embossed in gold. And I was just the help. What do you do in that moment? When the people who raised you don't recognize your face as one of their own? When your sister, your mother, your blood look through you, like you are an intern who overstayed her welcome? Would you have walked in anyway? Made a scene? Demanded recognition? Or would you have done what I did, stood silently in the place between rage and grief and smiled? Because I smiled as the weight of it sank into my chest, smiled as the heat rose up my neck but never made it to my eyes, smiled as I realized that I had never truly belonged here, and maybe I never would. That's the thing they never tell you about families like mine, wealthy enough to look polished but not deep enough to care who they polish out of the picture. They don't scream at you. They don't disown you in dramatic gestures. They just edit you quietly, like a typo in the family history. And if you're not paying close attention, you'll thank them for it. I remembered the call 2 weeks before. Madison had mentioned something vague about limited capacity. "You don't really need a seat, right?" You'll be moving around, managing details. I had laughed nervously, stupidly thinking she was joking. I didn't even get a printed invitation. And still, I made her monogram by hand. Still, I showed up. Why? Because somewhere deep inside, I still believed I could earn my place. That's what they teach you early on when you grow up as the quiet one, the one who gets A's without being asked, who paints in the living room while the rest of the family watches television. You believe that if you are useful enough, kind enough, valuable enough, they'll make room for you. But here's the truth. They never intended to. My father would have made sure I had a seat. He would have stood beside me, hand on my back, and introduced me to every person in the room. But he was gone. And once he was gone, so was my space in the house. My mother inherited the legacy, and she passed it to the daughter who smiled bigger and talked louder. Not the one who stayed up all night making things beautiful. Maybe check with the back entrance, the assistant offered softly. There's a staff door through the catering entrance. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Because in that moment, I understood. They wanted me out of the picture, and I had spent too long sharpening their frame. So I walked. Out the grand doors, down the stone steps, each one echoing a little louder than the last. The wind was cold against my neck. The sky was the color of wet steel, and my hands trembled, but not from the temperature. From clarity. They thought I had nothing. But I had everything they depended on. I had the files, the assets, the control, quietly registered in my name, legally mine. And in that moment, I realized I was no longer asking for a seat. I was about to pull the table out from under them. Have you ever shown up, only to find you were never really invited? Press 1 if you have, press 2 if you think it would never happen to you. Because that night, I learned the most painful truth of all. Sometimes the people who call you family are the first ones to leave you standing outside in the cold. And sometimes you have to let them close the door so you can build something better without them. Madison was always the one with the glossy finish. Even when we were children, she sparkled in a way that made adults lean in. Teachers praised her confidence. Neighbors complimented her posture, her smile, the way she asked for more lemonade without sounding demanding. She was the first to be cast in the school play, even when she forgot her lines. The one who stood in the front row of every recital, even if she couldn't sing on key. And our mother, Elaine, adored her for it. I didn't resent Madison back then, not exactly. I was quieter, slower to speak, more interested in how things worked than how they looked. I built miniature houses out of cereal boxes, stitched pages together to make my own books, traced blueprints of places I wanted to live someday. I didn't know yet that silence could be a disadvantage in our home. I thought it was simply who I was. My father noticed, though. He was the one who sat with me on Saturday mornings while Madison went shopping with Mom. He taught me how to hold a ruler properly, how to line up measurements with care. He called it visual precision, said it would serve me someday. It did. For a while, I lived on those moments, the only kind of attention that didn't require a performance. But he died too early. A stroke, sudden and unforgiving. I was 16. Madison cried the loudest at the funeral. Elaine wore a black suit that matched her new role. Widow, matriarch, voice of the legacy. In the days that followed, Madison stayed in the center of everything, consoling guests, organizing flowers, telling stories about Dad as if she had been his closest confidant. I stayed in my room, quietly packing the sketchbook he'd once signed on the cover. To Julia, who sees what others miss, I never saw that book again. Madison borrowed it for a school project a few weeks later and lost it. After the funeral, the dynamic shifted sharply. Elaine no longer divided her time. She poured herself into Madison's World College applications, internships, golf clubs, the right people. I was self-sufficient, she said, in a tone that was never quite complimentary. I didn't need guidance, just space. So she gave me space. Wide, cold space. When Madison chose to study business at a second-tier private college, Elaine said it was strategic. She has charm. She doesn't need grades. When I won a design scholarship to a top university, Elaine nodded, murmured, "Good for you." and asked if I could help format Madison's resume that weekend. I did. Even in our 20s, nothing changed. Madison got a job in the family's real estate business after graduation. Elaine gave her a title, Client Experience Director. She had no experience, but she had the smile. I wasn't invited to apply. I had already gone my own way, Mom said, working in the art world, as she called it, never bothering to learn what I actually did. I was, by that point, a senior creative at one of the best branding firms in Boston. I led national campaigns, pitched to billion-dollar clients. But at the Thanksgiving table, I was the one seated at the end, next to the sideboard. So, still doing your little logos? Madison would ask, and Elaine would smirk behind her wine glass. And I would nod. Always nod. I remember one holiday when Madison announced she was seeing someone serious, Ethan, a broker's son with a trust fund and a big future. Elaine beamed. She immediately started referring to him as our future. She wasn't subtle about what this meant. A connection, an elevation, an entry ticket to the next level of the social ladder. Madison, for the first time in her life, looked like she had found a script worth reading. I congratulated her. I meant it. In my heart, I still wanted us to be sisters. When they got engaged, the family exploded into preparations. Madison delegated, Elaine negotiated. I offered my help genuinely. Foolishly. Since you're in design, maybe you could handle the invites? Madison asked over brunch. It would save us, thousands. I said yes. I didn't ask for payment. I told myself it would be a gift. A way back in. A bridge. What followed was 13 months of late-night revisions, gold foil tests, wax seal samples, and endless tweaks. Can you make the font a little less cheap? Madison once texted. Ethan's mother is very particular. I revised it again. The floral border looks too sad, Elaine said. Try something more uplifting. I drew it again. I didn't push back. I was grateful to be included, even as a shadow. I poured myself into the work. I sourced rare cotton paper. I hand-lettered their monogram. I created a visual language for a family that had never spoken mine. I told myself that if I could make it beautiful enough, they'd finally see me. They'd say thank you. They'd remember I was one of them. Weeks before the event, I noticed something odd on the event website I had built. Under the Family tab, Madison was listed, Elaine was listed, Ethan's entire family was there. My name? Absent. I sent a quick message to Madison. Hey, not sure if it's an oversight, but my name isn't showing under family. Her reply came an hour later. Oh, weird. I'll check. Probably just a glitch. The glitch was never fixed. I asked Elaine a few days later. I'm not sure why you care, she said lightly. It's not like anyone is reading that closely. But I was. I had read too closely my entire life. Still, I kept going. I finalized the seating charts. I curated the table names. I wrapped their welcome boxes with silk-screened ribbons I designed myself. The night before the gala, I stayed up until 3 a.m., preparing one final edit for a slideshow they had decided to include last minute. I thought of Dad. I wondered what he would have said. He would have told me to walk away. But I wasn't ready. Have you ever believed that if you just worked harder, they'd finally love you? Press 1 if yes, or 2 if you've stopped trying. Madison always knew how to fill a room. Elaine always knew how to erase one. I was always somewhere in between, too quiet to be missed, too useful to be appreciated. But something was changing in me, slowly, like pressure building behind a dam. I had spent years framing their image. Soon, I'd remember that the one who holds the frame gets to decide what stays inside it. There's a specific kind of violence that doesn't leave bruises. It's quiet, bureaucratic, delivered in the form of omission of decisions made behind closed doors and names quietly left off lists. That's the kind of violence my family specialized in, and I had become fluent in its language long before I realized it had a name. The weeks leading up to the gala blurred into one long chain of deliverables. Final proofs. Envelope runs. Reprint requests from vendors who couldn't match the ivory tone Elaine insisted on, not cream, not beige ivory. I adjusted every detail, resolved every delay. Madison, ever the curator of surface-level grace, sent quick one-line messages between brunches and dress fittings. Font too soft. Feels cheap. Can we swap the rose motif for peonies? Ethan's mom prefers them. Also, can you reduce the script size by, like, 30%? Feels too loud. I never replied with anything but yes. I was too tired to fight, and too conditioned to think I had the right to say no. I remember one night tone of many I was in my apartment, cross-checking the RSVP system against the print list Madison sent over. I paused, scanned again. My name wasn't there. Not under family. Not under staff. Not anywhere. At first, I told myself it was a mistake. A clerical error. I texted her lightly. Hey, think my name might have been left off the seating list? It took 3 hours for her to respond. Oh yeah, that's because you'll be moving around, right? Managing signage and stuff. No time to sit. No time to sit. I stared at the words as if they would rearrange into something less cruel. They didn't. Still, I kept working. Elaine emailed me 2 days before the event, copying Madison, with the subject line, Final Visuals. Inside, she wrote, Thanks for your support, Julia. Everything looks beautiful. We'll be sure to shout out your design firm if anyone asks. My design firm! As if I had been hired, as if I hadn't created every asset without pay, without recognition, without even a place at the table. And then came the slideshow. They wanted a timeline-style visual for the entrance screen, a visual history of the Bennett Group's 30 years. I asked Madison to send me archive photos. She sent over a folder titled Highlights. Inside, 10 glossy headshots of herself over the years, photos of Elaine cutting ribbons, of office buildings and award ceremonies. Not a single photo of my father. None of me. Nothing that hinted at the real roots of the company. I dug into my own storage drive, found the old scanned Polaroids Dad had kept in his desk drawer. I added one of the original office space, one of him shaking hands with his first client, and one of the two of us standing beside a wall map when I was 12. I inserted them between the modern portraits. I didn't ask for permission. I didn't remove Madison's photos either. I simply told the truth in sequence. The next day, I got a message from Madison. Hey, Mom thinks some of the older photos feel off-brand. Can you cut them? I didn't reply. I left them in. It was petty, maybe, but it was also necessary. Because when someone tries that hard to erase your history, inserting yourself back into the story is an act of survival. The final design package was over 300 files. I uploaded them all to a private drive, then transferred only the live links they'd need for the event. What they didn't know was this. I had already filed copyright registration on every asset under my name. The fonts, the color palettes, the motif sets all proprietary. Not just pretty, but protected. And the slideshow? Time-stamped, version-controlled, and archived. They thought I was just a pair of hands. But I'd learned from the best me father. He taught me to document, to own my work, to protect what I made, even if no one else believed it was worth protecting. Have you ever made something for someone who later pretended it wasn't you? Press 1 if yes, or 2 if you hope it never happens. On the night before the gala, as I zipped up the emerald green dress I had chosen carefully picked to align with their brand colors but not quite match the bridal party, I stood in front of the mirror and said the words out loud, as if naming it would make it real. They're going to cut me out. It wasn't paranoia. It was prophecy. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. Checked the email one last time. No updates, no invitation, no apology. I printed 2 extra copies of the guest list. I checked the fonts again. I looked at the cover slide of the Welcome Screen Bennett Group, a legacy 30 years in the making, and I stared at Madison's face, framed center, right in gold. And I thought, I did this. I built this. And they're about to pretend I was never here. But not for long. They didn't know about the ownership clause in the slide's metadata. They didn't know about the hosting platform's master controls still routed through my account. They didn't know that their legacy, the one I was told I didn't belong to, was sitting quietly in a folder on my desktop, tagged with my digital fingerprint, invisible but irrefutable. They were going to go on stage, smile, thank the partners, praise the journey, toast the future, and I would be nowhere in the program. But in the background, in every printed page, in every digital frame, they would still be standing on something I made. And I was about to make sure they couldn't forget that, because they hadn't just deleted me, they had underestimated me. And that, I've learned, is the first step toward losing everything. It was still early when I arrived. The parking lot of the Fairmont estate was already dotted with black cars, most of them with private driver tags, polished to a mirror sheen. I parked my own car at the far edge, under a tree that had already shed its leaves, and sat for a moment with the engine off, letting the quiet fill the cabin. Through the windshield, I could see the entrance hall lit up in soft amber, wreaths hung in symmetrical elegance, staff in black and white moving briskly with checklists and earpieces. It looked exactly like what it was meant to look like. Power, wrapped in holiday warmth, a celebration disguised as family. This wasn't just the Bennett Group's 30th anniversary, it was Thanksgiving, and I was walking into both as a ghost. I gathered my bag, the emergency kit I had prepared with extra place cards, printed menus, double-sided tape, gold-edged pens, a backup USB with the slideshow, everything a professional designer might need to salvage a logistical crisis. I didn't expect anyone to thank me for it. I didn't expect anyone to notice. But I had told myself, foolishly, that maybe today would be different. That perhaps seeing the work displayed, the identity I had built with my own hands, would grant me some small invitation back into the family I had never really been allowed to enter. Inside, the atmosphere shimmered with the controlled chaos of final preparations. Florists were adjusting centerpieces, waiters setting down glasses with quiet precision. Madison's voice could be heard from upstairs, laughing, practiced, perfect. I approached the event coordinator, a woman named Laura, clipboard in hand, visibly stressed. When I introduced myself, she blinked. "Oh," she said, flipping pages. "You're the designer?" I thought everything was being handled off-site. I offered a tight smile. "I just wanted to check in, make sure nothing's missing." She nodded and gestured vaguely toward the ballroom. "Everything's been set according to the files." The mother of the bride made some last-minute seating adjustments, but otherwise we're good. Mother of the bride, not my mother, just the title, just the role. I made my way into the reception space. It was beautiful. I couldn't pretend otherwise. The color palette worked. The tables gleamed under chandelier light, gold flatware placed with precision, deep emerald accents across menus and napkins, each monogram pressed in clean foil. My design, my hands. My name, however, nowhere to be seen. Not in the program, not on the slide rotation, and most certainly, not on the seating chart. I checked again, just to be sure. Walked quietly to the oversized board near the entrance, pretending to admire the craftsmanship while scanning the names. Not only was I not at the family table, I wasn't listed at all. I called Madison. She didn't answer. I sent a brief text. "Hey, looks like I'm not assigned a seat?" Her reply came after 10 minutes. "Sorry, thought you'd be floating anyway, like coordinating stuff. Didn't think you'd sit." I read the message 3 times. I wasn't the coordinator. They had hired a professional team for that. I was never given any title, any job. I had been working behind the scenes because I wanted to be included, because I thought that maybe effort would mean presence. That was my mistake. Still, I stayed. I lingered by the service entrance, offering help when I could, adjusted a crooked banner, reprinted a menu when one was smudged. A staff member thanked me once, and for a second I felt human again. The ceremony began on the garden terrace just before sunset. I slipped into a folding chair at the back row, not part of any group, not acknowledged. Madison walked down the aisle on Elaine's arm, both radiant. The crowd murmured appreciatively. Phones rose in unison. I watched from a distance, every image lit by golden hour light, every frame curated and shared. I wasn't in any of them. After the vows, the guests were ushered into the cocktail area for hors d'oeuvres. I stood near the fountain, away from the cameras, sipping water from a paper cup meant for staff. Madison was taking photos with Ethan and his family on the front steps. I noticed how effortlessly Elaine moved among them, adjusting hair, fixing collars, positioning smiles. I was never asked to join. My presence wasn't missed. No one looked around to ask where Julia was. Later, when the ballroom opened for dinner, guests queued at the entrance, where names were cross-checked against a digital list. I joined the line, holding on to the last scrap of optimism. Perhaps someone had corrected it. Perhaps I'd be seated with the creatives, the vendors, even the family fringe. Anything but what came next. When I reached the front, the assistant tapped through the tablet and frowned. "Your name's not here. Let me check with the supervisor." She turned to Laura, who conferred with her, glancing up at me once, briefly. Laura approached. "I'm sorry, Miss Bennett, but your name isn't on the approved list. We've been instructed to keep the guest count tight." I swallowed, nodded. "I'm her sister." "Yes," she said, cautiously. "I understand, but we still need confirmation." That was when Elaine appeared. She approached from inside the ballroom, a glass of wine in one hand, smiling as if nothing had happened. "What's going on here?" she asked, calm, collected. "Mom," I said, trying not to let the heat rise into my face. "They said I'm not on the list." She tilted her head, expression unreadable. "Oh, Julia, did you really think you were invited? Strangers aren't allowed." The words didn't hit me like a slap. They didn't sting, they didn't explode. They just sank. Into my spine, into my chest, into every fragile illusion I had been nursing since childhood. Strangers. I nodded, slowly. "Then I'll live like a stranger," I said. My voice was steady, which surprised me. I didn't wait for a reply. I turned around. Behind me, I heard Laura ask if everything was all right. Elaine replied smoothly, "Just a misunderstanding with a vendor. Everything's fine." And just like that, I was erased again. Outside, the night air was sharper than I expected. My heels clicked over the flagstones with a strange finality. Each step hurt, the kind of pain that's both physical and symbolic. I walked to the edge of the lot, past guests laughing over cigarettes and toasts, and found a bench under a bare tree. I sat, hands folded over the clutch I had chosen so carefully. Across the courtyard, I could hear the music swell as dinner began. My work was inside. My name wasn't. I didn't cry. Not then. I just sat, the way I had always done, ever since I was a girl. Quietly, obediently, on the sideline, hoping someone would notice. And just like that, something inside me began to close. Not with rage, not with grief, with decision. Cold, clear, absolute, the kind you don't reverse, the kind you act on. And in that stillness, I understood something I had refused to admit for years. I would never be let in, because they had never left a place for me at the table. Not even on Thanksgiving. The bench was cold, stone layered with dew, a small forgotten seat near a fountain no one was watching. I sat there in the quiet of twilight, listening to the echo of water as it trickled down from the sculpture's mouthsome bronze heron, elegant and still. It had been placed there for aesthetics, something to fill a corner of the grand courtyard, much like I had been placed useful only when decorative, out of view once the show began. I stared straight ahead, not really seeing anything. The low thud of bass from inside the reception hall carried through the air, muffled by walls but steady, like a second heartbeat I no longer wanted. People were toasting by then, forks tapping crystal, chairs sliding across polished floors. My name wasn't spoken. My presence wasn't missed. I was outside, in more ways than one, not just off the list but off the map. A few guests passed by on their way in, the latecomers. They didn't recognize me. One woman glanced at me with vague curiosity, then turned her eyes away quickly, not out of rudeness, but out of instinct. People can sense a crack in the surface, and they don't want to look too long at anything broken. I must have looked strange formally dressed, sitting alone on stone steps, back straight, hands clasped too tightly in my lap, as if I were trying not to spill something that had already poured out of me. But I didn't move. I thought I would cry, but the tears didn't come. It wasn't that kind of pain. It was quieter, older, the kind of grief that doesn't scream it waits. I let it settle in my bones. And slowly, my mind started tracing backwards, not through the event, not through the humiliation or the logistics or the vanished invitation, but further through birthdays missed, praise withheld, kindness rationed like medicine. I remembered my 16th birthday, when Elaine and Madison went shopping without telling me, came back with bags for themselves, and told me they'd thought I wanted a quiet day. I remembered my college move-in, how Mom dropped me off at the curb, said she had to hurry back for Madison's sorority meeting. I remembered Thanksgiving 2 years ago, when I'd brought a handmade gift and Madison had walked in late with store-bought wine, and yet only she had been called thoughtful. And I remembered all the ways I had tried to fix it, to be better, to earn it, the ways I had offered myself, folded myself, redesigned myself, the dinners I hosted that no one came to, the holidays I showed up for with gifts wrapped to match the color scheme Elaine liked, the calls I made, the texts I sent, the invitations never returned, a whole life spent trying to be enough for people who had already decided I was not. I looked down at my hand snails painted a soft green to match the wedding palette, fingers still stained faintly with ink from the calligraphy I had done just 2 nights ago. Every detail I had prepared, every piece I had delivered, was still inside that building, being used, admired, complimented. But the person who made them, who had stayed up late, adjusting line spacing, who had hand-pressed seals into thick ivory envelopes, that person was on a bench, in the dark, alone. There was something liberating about the clarity. Elaine had said, with no hesitation, "Strangers aren't allowed." And I believed her, not in the way she intended as a punishment, but as a truth. I was a stranger to them, not because I had changed, but because I had never belonged. I had always been someone they couldn't see unless I was serving a purpose. And even then, only briefly. That realization didn't shatter me. It crystallized me. I pulled out my phone, not to text them, not to beg for explanation or apology, but to make one call. Stephanie. My friend, my old college roommate, the one person I hadn't invited because Elaine had said there were no plus ones, unless they're married. Stephanie had asked if that applied to family, and I'd brushed it off, said it was complicated. Now, I understood. Everything had always been complicated when it came to me. She answered on the second ring. "Hey," she said, then paused. "Are you okay?" I didn't try to explain. Just said, "Can you come get me?" There was another pause. Then her voice shifted into something firm, protective. "Stay put, I'm already grabbing my keys." I hung up and slipped the phone back into my bag. The water from the fountain kept flowing, indifferent. Behind me, the music continued, the laughter rising in polite intervals, glasses clinking, chairs scraping. Madison would be twirling in her dress by now, her arms around Ethan, her eyes finding the camera at the perfect angle. Elaine would be glowing, telling some investor how proud she was, how Madison had always been the one with vision. And I had delivered the vision. They had built the evening on top of it, but they never planned to share the view. So I sat. For 10, 20, maybe 30 minutes. I didn't keep track. I just let the night pass through me. When Stephanie's car pulled into the lot, headlights low, I stood. My legs ached, heels digging into skin rubbed raw. I didn't feel pain. I felt completion. She stepped out of the car before I reached her, wrapped her arms around me without asking questions. I let myself lean into the gesture. Just a moment. Just long enough. "You're freezing," she whispered. "No," I said. "I'm done." That night, I didn't cry in her passenger seat. I didn't unravel on her couch. I simply sat there, sipping the tea she made, listening to the quiet. The space was warm, simple, uncomplicated. I wore her oversized sweatshirt, folded the sleeves up at the wrist. I looked down at the hem of my dress, emerald green against her beige carpet, and thought about how carefully I had chosen it. Not because it was mine, but because it matched them. The next morning I woke early, and something had shifted. Not healed, not forgiven, but released. I no longer wanted a seat at their table. I wanted to build my own. The morning after the gala, I sat at Stephanie's kitchen table with a mug of coffee that had long since gone cold, laptop open, fingers still for a moment over the trackpad. The air was still. Outside her window, Boston was just beginning to stir eerily joggers passing by, the low hum of delivery vans weaving through residential streets. I could hear her in the other room, moving gently, giving me space. She didn't ask what I was doing, and I didn't offer an explanation. Because what I was doing wasn't a reaction, it was a response, methodical and long overdue. The files lived on a drive that only I had access to. Every design asset for the Bennett Group's anniversary, branding the custom invitations, monograms, programs, slideshow, animations, even the layered logo files was carefully organized, backed up twice, registered under my name with time-stamped certificates. Months ago, when I realized the scale of what they wanted from me, I had taken the precaution of filing intellectual property protection on each major design set. At the time, it was habit, almost muscle memory, something I did for clients who didn't pay on time or made vague promises about exposure. I hadn't expected to use it. I hadn't expected to need it against my own family. But sitting there in Stephanie's kitchen, in the loose quiet of Sunday morning, I opened the control panel on the platform that hosted the digital files I'd shared with the gala production team. There, in plain sight, were the active links public-facing assets for menus, seating charts, and signage. I hovered over the disable access toggle. My hand didn't shake. I clicked. Link went dark. The slideshow scheduled to loop across 4 rented screens would no longer load. The QR codes printed on the welcome signs meant to guide guests to the digital guest book and event schedule and functional. The downloadable press kit, full of high-resolution images and pre-written bios all gone, and the slideshow, with its timeline of manipulated family history, scrubbed clean of me. That, too, would disappear. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel anything at all. What I felt was the clean silence of boundaries being drawn. Not spiteful, not angry, just necessary. By late afternoon, my phone began to buzz. A call from an unknown number, then another. I didn't answer. Then came the text first from Laura, the event coordinator, confused and firm. "Hi, Julia. We're having trouble accessing your files from the drive. Do you have backups?" Then Madison, "Hey, the slideshow is down. Can you check? We're trying to loop it at brunch." Brunch? Of course. They were still celebrating, still drinking champagne over a centerpiece I had designed, still holding up the frame I had built and wondering why the picture had vanished. Then Elaine, no greeting, just, "Please fix the links. This is embarrassing." I didn't reply. I forwarded a single email to both Elaine and Madison. No greeting, no explanation. Just this. Use of the following assets constitutes infringement of registered copyright. As of November 26th, permission to display, distribute, or adapt these materials has been revoked. Kindly cease all usage immediately to avoid further legal action. It was signed with my full name, Julia Ray Bennett. I knew it would sting. 5 minutes later, Madison responded, "Are you serious?" I didn't write back. She sent another. "This is family, Julia. Don't do this." I let it sit. At noon, Stephanie placed a hand on my shoulder as I stared at the laptop screen, waiting for something I couldn't name. "Want to take a walk?" she asked. I nodded. We walked 2 blocks to the coffee shop near her apartment, sunlight slanting between buildings, wind soft but insistent. Inside, people were laughing, working, living lives unshaped by betrayal. I stood in line, ordered a second coffee, and watched the barista scribble my name on the cup. She spelled it wrong, but at least she used it. By the time we returned, the emails had escalated. Elaine's was filled with passive-aggressive flourish show disappointed she was, how she had always supported my art, how I was choosing to damage the family's reputation. This behavior reflects poorly on all of us. I stared at that sentence for a long time. All of us. As if I had ever been part of the us she meant. There was a time, not that long ago, when a message like that would have wrecked me. I would have questioned myself, justified their choices, rewritten the past so I could believe I was overreacting. But I wasn't that girl anymore. Not the one who stayed up until 3 in the morning redoing place cards just because Elaine thought gold was too harsh for a Thanksgiving palette. Not the one who sent proofs to Madison with 3 alternate options so she'd have something to reject politely. Not the one who kept showing up to be useful, hoping to be seen. No, this version of me was finished performing. They had built the whole celebration on top of my work, but what they didn't understand, what they never cared enough to ask, was that I still held the foundation, and I had quietly removed it. The following morning, I woke to a different kind of message. A short, professional email from a partner at one of the Bennett Group's largest investor firms. He had seen the gala materials before everything had gone dark. He had questions. Who had designed the branding? Would I be open to discussing an opportunity? That afternoon, I took the call. He was direct, curious, respectful. Your work had more depth than I'm used to seeing at these events, he said. There was emotional clarity, not just polish. That's rare. I thanked him. He asked if I was still freelance or if I'd considered launching a boutique agency. I hadn't, not seriously, but something in me clicked when he said it. I told him I'd be open to discussing terms. He asked to meet in person the following week. That night, I walked to the edge of Stephanie's apartment balcony, coffee in hand, city lights stretching out in quiet constellations. It wasn't revenge I felt, not satisfaction, just the clean knowledge that I had finally taken something back. They had used me, then discarded me. So I had removed myself, not just from the room, but from the entire structure they'd taken for granted. And now, they were standing in an empty frame, wondering why it wouldn't hold. It was 3 days after the gala when the second call came, this time not from a number I didn't recognize, but from a direct line with a signature embedded in the email, Peter Callahan, senior partner, Norbridge Capital. I had heard the name before. Norbridge was one of the silent engines behind the Bennett Group's rapid expansion in the late 2010s. They were old money, discreet, deeply embedded in the real estate landscape, and known for backing family firms that looked like Madison polished, pedigreed, pleasant. That someone like him would reach out to someone like me was not just unusual. It was intentional. His message was brief. He'd been impressed with the aesthetic identity at the event and was interested in discussing potential collaborations beyond the Bennett brand. The phrasing was elegant, but the subtext was louder than anything he wrote. He was distancing himself from them. Not because they had failed publicly, but because in the space where value was measured, they had revealed a void. And somehow, despite being erased from the spotlight, I had managed to show up in the only way that mattered in the work. I took the call the next morning from my studio apartment. Stephanie had left early for work, and I sat by the window, phone pressed to my ear, the hum of early traffic outside like a distant tide. Peter's voice was smooth, calm, the kind of voice that had never once been rushed through a receptionist or had to wait on hold. He asked me about my process, my experience leading teams, my client list. I answered plainly, not embellishing. When he asked if I had ever considered starting a creative agency of my own, I paused. The question itself felt heavier than I expected. I've thought about it, I said carefully, but never seriously. Maybe now's the time, he replied. Talent like yours shouldn't sit behind someone else's name. After the call, I sat in silence. Not stunned, not even elated, just still, because I knew. This wasn't just a compliment. It was a door opening, but only because I had chosen to step away from the one that had kept me waiting in the hallway for too long. I didn't call Elaine. I didn't text Madison. They would hear about it eventually, and when they did, it wouldn't be from me. It would come from the kinds of conversations they always tried to control but never truly understood, the ones that happened quietly between people who make decisions, not noise. By the end of that week, 3 more inquiries came in. A boutique hotel group, a startup in New York looking for a rebrand, and a high-profile interior design firm that had seen my work in a photo from the Bennett Eventone that had been posted before everything was taken down. They didn't know my name, only that the design had a signature grace. That phrase stayed with me. Signature grace. It was the opposite of everything I had been taught about recognition. My family had made it clear. If you weren't loud, if you didn't shine, if you didn't claim space with ease, you didn't matter. But I had designed in silence, and somehow, that silence had left a mark. I registered my business that month. Bennett wasn't part of the name. I chose something neutral, elegant, entirely mine. I reached out to a few contacts I had worked with over the years: editors, photographers, stylists, quietly building a small network of collaborators. No one asked about the gala. They asked about what I could do. And I answered with work, not explanation. When the Norbridge partnership was announced formally, through a press release, I expected a call from Madison. Instead, Elaine called. The voicemail was only 30 seconds long. "Julia, we heard about your venture. Congratulations, I suppose. I hope you understand that this puts us in a complicated position with our own partnerships. We'll need to sit down and clarify boundaries." She didn't ask how I was. She didn't ask why. She simply responded the way she always had, from a place of ownership, as though I were still an extension of her narrative, something she could reposition. I didn't call her back. What would I say? That the investors she had spent years chasing now saw more potential in the daughter she had treated like a footnote? That the only reason they had ever attended that gala was because I had made the brand look modern, intentional, coherent? That their own success had stood on the shoulders of the person they never invited in? Number. She would never hear those words from me. Instead, she would hear them in silence, in the clients who shifted allegiance, in the features that listed my firm and not theirs, in the conversations where her name was no longer necessary. Not because I had erased her, but because I had stopped needing her recognition to build something real. A few weeks later, Stephanie and I celebrated with takeout and wine on her balcony. It wasn't a grand party, no photographers, no press. Just us, paper napkins, and mismatched glasses, watching the city breathe. She raised her glass and said, "To quiet beginnings." I smiled, the kind that reached all the way through me, because that was what it was: not revenge, not payback, just a beginning carved out of the space where something had once been missing. I didn't want applause. I didn't need them to see me now, because the people who mattered already did. And, more importantly, for the first time in my life, I did too. It came on a Tuesday afternoon, rainy, unremarkable, the kind of gray day that disappears into itself. I was reviewing design revisions for a hospitality client when my phone lit up. Madison. The name sat on the screen like a bruise that hadn't faded. I stared at it, watching it ring. Part of me wanted to let it go to voicemail. Another part quieter, steadier, pressed accept. I didn't speak first. I let the silence stretch just long enough. "Julia?" Her voice was hesitant, thinner than I remembered. I need to talk to you." I said nothing, letting her fill the space. "It's not about the company," she added quickly. "Or Mom. It's personal." That last word felt strange coming from her. She had spent a lifetime keeping things surface, level well, lit, polished, scripted. But now, something in her tone cracked slightly at the edges. I asked, "What is it?" "Simple. Neutral. I don't really know where to start," she said. "Things have been hard." I heard her take a breath, one of those practiced exhales people use to stay composed. "Ethan's working late every night, most weekends too. He says it's the market, but I don't know. We barely speak anymore unless it's about logistics. Mom says I'm overreacting. She says successful men are always busy, and I should be more grateful. But I feel like I'm disappearing in my own house. Oh. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the corner of the ceiling, letting her words settle. There was nothing surprising in them. Not the workaholic husband, not the mother defending the man over the woman, not the slow erosion of self. I had seen it before, felt it, but Madison was only now arriving at the intersection I'd been stranded at for years. I thought you had everything you wanted, I said softly, without sarcasm. Just truth. So did I, she whispered. There was a pause, then, I've been thinking about what you wrote in that email, after the gala, about not accepting being treated like an afterthought, about boundaries. At the time, I thought you were just being dramatic, but now, her voice caught. Now I get it. Maybe not fully, but I'm starting to understand what it means to not be seen. I could have told her that this was how it begins, that small realization, that quiet despair. I could have told her about the years of shrinking myself, of showing up anyway, of holding out hope like a cup no one bothered to fill. But I didn't. She wasn't ready for all that. What she needed in that moment wasn't a history lesson, it was acknowledgement. That sounds really hard, I said. It is, she replied. I don't know who to talk to. Mom keeps telling me to smile more, to be patient, that I have a beautiful life and I'm just not appreciating it enough. I knew that refrain too well. Gratitude used as a gag, beauty weaponized against truth. Elaine had perfected that tacticynsis. The house is stunning while ignoring that it's sinking. Have you talked to anyone else? I asked. A therapist? No, she said quickly. I don't want it getting out. Ethan's family would see it as weakness. And Mom, she'd make it a thing. You know how she is. I did. Madison cleared her throat. I don't know why I'm telling you this. We haven't spoken in months. I let her sit with that discomfort. She needed to feel it. Then I said, maybe because deep down you know what it feels like to be invisible now, and maybe for the first time you realize I wasn't exaggerating. There was a long silence, not defensive, just waited. I was horrible to you, she said eventually. At the wedding, before it, always maybe. I didn't confirm it, I didn't deny it. Some truths don't need repetition, they just need space. I'm not calling to ask for anything, she added, voice steadier now. I needed to say something out loud, and I guess you're the only one I trust to hear it and not use it against me. That landed heavier than I expected. I realized then how lonely she must have become. To reach out to the sister she had helped erase, to dial my number after months of silence, see not to apologize, but to confess. I'm not the same person anymore, I said, not unkindly. I don't live in that house of mirrors where everything's about keeping up appearances. I know, she said. I see that now, and I envy it. She asked if we could meet for coffee. I didn't agree immediately. I told her I'd think about it. I needed to know that this wasn't just a moment of vulnerability, that she wasn't looking to be rescued or forgiven too easily. Quiet revenge doesn't mean cruelty, but it does mean clarity. And I had spent far too many years confusing those two. That night, I sat at my window, watching the streetlights shimmer through wet glass. Her voice lingered, not the words, but the tone, the softness, the unsteadiness. The realization that she had run out of room inside the world she helped build. I knew that feeling too well. I remembered sitting alone on that bench, heels digging into my skin, knowing no one would come looking for me. Now here she was, reaching backward, hoping I might still be there. And I was. But I was different now. Madison's call didn't undo what had been done. It didn't erase the choices she made or the silence she stood behind. But it cracked something open. A possibility. Not of reconciliation, not yet, but of recognition. For once, she wasn't calling as the golden child, the favorite, the public face of a family legacy. She was just a woman, quietly unraveling, finally seeing the cost of the roles we had been cast into. And for the first time, I wasn't desperate to fix it. I wasn't hungry for closeness. I wasn't waiting. I was listening, and I would decide what came next. The first snow fell quietly, layering the sidewalks in a soft hush that made the city look gentler than it really was. It was mid-December, and the storefronts were already dressed in twinkle lights and scripted decals about joy, peace, and family. I watched it all from the window of my new apartmenta loft space in an old converted textile building, tall ceilings, exposed brick, nothing inherited, nothing gifted. Every piece of furniture had been chosen by me, paid for with money I earned under my own name, not the shadow of someone else's legacy. This place didn't echo with old stories. It breathed differently. Christmas used to mean obligation, polished silverware, assigned seating, performative warmth, the unspoken rule that any hint of discomfort should be smoothed over for the sake of tradition. It had always been Elaine's season. She orchestrated it like a brand campaign, curated gifts, matching wrapping paper, candied pecans in crystal bowls. Everyone smiled. No one spoke the truth. I had spent years showing up anyway, hoping one year I'd be seated at the real table, not the decorative edge. But this year was different. I made a list, not of gifts, of names. People who had shown up, not because they had to, because they chose to. Stephanie, of course. My friend Mira from design school. Two of my new clients' women who had started their own businesses after walking away from inherited roles that never fit, and Jason. We'd only been dating a few months, but something about his presence made sense, calm, honest, unrushed. He asked if I wanted help setting up, and when I said no, he said okay. That was new. I sent out invitations, digital ones, elegant but warm, designed simply in cream and slate, with a line at the bottom, dinner at 7, come as you are. It wasn't about appearances. It was about presence. Real presence. Elaine sent an email the week before Christmas, a forwarded message with the subject, holiday plans. Inside, a single line, Christmas Eve dinner at our place, 7 p.m. Madison and Ethan will be there. Let's keep things normal this year. No greeting. No acknowledgement of our last conversation, or the months of silence before that. Just an instruction, as if nothing had happened. As if the gala had been a scheduling misstep, not a fracture. I didn't reply. 3 days later, Madison texted, I know you're doing your own thing, but Mom really hopes you'll come. She's been trying. I stared at the message, thumb hovering. Then I locked my phone and turned back to the stove. I had rosemary bread in the oven. I had candles waiting to be lit. I had people who wanted to sit at my tablano because I was useful, but because I mattered. The night of Christmas Eve, my apartment filled with the kind of warmth you can't decorate into existence. Stephanie brought wine and a playlist. Mira arrived with handmade napkin rings, nervous they wouldn't match. Jason came last, snowflakes in his hair, carrying a pie he'd made from scratch. We ate too much, laughed too loudly, played board games and told stories we weren't ashamed of. No one asked me to prove my place. No one edited my presence out of the evening. At one point, I stepped into the kitchen to refill the cider, and Jason followed. He leaned against the counter, watched me for a second, then said, You look settled. I smiled, not out of habit, but out of truth. I am. He nodded like he already knew. That was the thing about him, he didn't try to fix me. He just stood near, steady. The next morning, I opened the only gift that had arrived in wrapping paper with my mother's handwriting. It was a scarf, pale gray, soft cashmere, expensive, impersonal, no note, no card. Just a label still tucked into the seam. I folded it neatly and placed it back in the box. Later that day, Madison sent another text. I heard your dinner was nice. I wish I could have come. I didn't answer right away. I read it, then reread it, and finally replied, maybe next year, if the invitation still stands. That was the truth. I wasn't making promises anymore. Not to her, not to anyone who had once looked through me like I was furniture. My guest list had rules now. Not rules of formality, but of reciprocity. You had to bring something real, not a dish or a gift yourself. I didn't miss the old Christmas. I didn't miss the curated elegance or the family photos taken with tense smiles. I didn't miss pretending. What I had now wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And that, I realized, was rarer than any heirloom china Elaine could set on a table. I hadn't burned bridges. I had simply stopped crossing ones that never led home. And for the first time, I wasn't waiting for a chair to be pulled out for me. I had built my own table, and everyone at it had chosen to be there, including me. Spring came late that year, the kind of cold that lingers past its welcome, as if the air still hadn't decided whether it would allow warmth back in. I understood that indecision, how the body hesitates even after the wound has closed. But when the thaw finally arrived, I felt it. Not just in the weather, but in the shape of my own life. I had been living in the loft for 6 months. What started as a temporary space had grown into something else, something rooted. The walls no longer echoed. They held. The shelves weren't full yet, but they were deliberate. I had chosen every object. Nothing gifted out of guilt. Nothing borrowed out of expectation. Every corner had been claimed by someone who had never been given anything without conditions. Me. I was standing at the window one morning when the email came in. The subject line was vague. Update on property proposal. But the sender made it clear. It was from a mid-sized development firm that had once contracted the Bennett Group for staging work. The message was straightforward. They had been impressed with my portfolio, especially the branding work they'd seen at the Norbridge Pitch event. They were looking for a full-service identity redesign for a new chain of co-living properties. It was the kind of account that could define a studio. 6 figures, creative control, public-facing credit. I sat down slowly, reading it again. Then I forwarded it to my business attorney with a single line. Let's talk terms. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same developers who used to ask for Madison by name were now reaching out to me directly, not as a favor, not because I was convenient, because I had built something they needed, because I had stopped waiting for permission. It wasn't long before Madison found out. She emailed, then called. This time, I picked up. Her voice was careful, edged with something brittle. I heard about the Norbridge contract, she said. And now the Sullivan project. That used to be ours. I said nothing. She continued. I'm not angry, just surprised. That word sat strangely in the air. Surprised, as if what I'd done was a deviation, not a continuation. She still hadn't realized that I had always been capable. The difference was that I had stopped handing my work to people who wore it like their own skin. I didn't take it from you, I said evenly. They came to me. There was a long pause. Is there a chance we could ever work together again? On something separate from Mom? The question wasn't offensive. It wasn't even manipulative. It was tired. It came from someone who was beginning to understand how many bridges she had watched collapse without knowing she was the one lighting matches. I'm not sure, I said. Maybe. But it wouldn't look the way it did before. I know, she whispered. I wouldn't ask you to carry it again. We ended the call politely. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt settled. I had nothing left to prove to her. Or to Elaine. Or to the network of people who had once only seen me as background, as support, as the girl who quietly made things beautiful without asking for credit. In April, I signed the lease on a studio space in the South End. It was small, just 2 rooms and a skylight, but it had a door with my name on it. I stood in that room on move-in day, alone, and ran my hand along the empty desk. This was mine, not inherited, not shared, built. The work grew. So did my life. Stephanie and I still had our Sunday dinners. Jason and I began splitting our weeks between his place and mine, never forced, always chosen. I started mentoring 2 young designers women who reminded me of myself at 22, brimming with ideas but unsure whether they were allowed to speak them aloud. I told them the truth. Your voice won't be given to you. You build it, brick by brick. Elaine never responded to my final email, the one I sent after declining another family holiday. I hadn't expected her to. She didn't understand how boundaries worked. She only understood silence as punishment. But for me, silence wasn't punishment anymore. It was peace. The absence of performance. The absence of walking into a room where the shape of your body is always edited to fit someone else's story. I had stopped auditioning. Months passed, then a year. And somewhere between rebranding a sustainable furniture company and designing signage for a children's hospital, I realized I no longer flinched when I saw Madison's name in an article or Elaine's photo in a newsletter. They didn't disappear. They just became irrelevant to my sense of worth, and that more than any contract, any campaign was the real power move. One night, while reorganizing some files at the studio, I came across an old folder, hand-sketched drafts from the Bennett Gala, a list of asset requests, my original concept mood board. I paused, fingertips tracing the pencil lines. For a second, I felt that old ache, the kind that lives in the gap between what you gave and what you were never thanked for. But it passed. I closed the folder, slid it into the archive drawer, and labeled it clearly, closed work. Because that chapter wasn't undone. It was complete. Not long after, I hosted a small party at the studio to mark the 1-year anniversary of my firm. Nothing extravagant, just wine, simple food, friends, people who had chosen me. At one point, someone asked if I came from a creative family. I smiled carefully. Sort of, I said. But the house I grew up in wasn't built for me. I looked around the studio, light reflecting off the walls I'd painted myself. So I built my own. And I meant it. I wasn't invited. So I built the whole house. Quietly, completely, room by room, and now every door in it opens when I decide it does. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is say nothing at all and simply walk away, not in defeat, but in clarity, in quiet self-respect. This story isn't just about being left out of a wedding, or a company, or a family narrative. It's about what happens when you're constantly overlooked, until you decide to stop waiting for a seat at someone else's table and start building something of your own. Silence isn't always weakness. Sometimes it's strategy, sometimes it's healing, and sometimes it's the only language that people who never truly listened will finally begin to understand. If you've ever been dismissed, excluded, or made to feel like a supporting character in your own life but found the strength to rise, to reclaim your voice in your own quiet way, I'd love to hear your story. Drop a comment below. Share your moment of quiet power. Let someone else reading know they're not alone. And if this story resonated with you, consider subscribing for more real, reflective stories about leaving, healing, and becoming on your own terms.